Share screen. So, klaro ang PowerPoint. Hello?
Oh, sir. Yes,
Alright.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sige. So today we will be discussing on law enforcement and human rights. So there is a need to study both law enforcement and human rights because you police officers are now being trained on this so-called human race human rights based approach when it comes to police work. Now, the human rights-based approach will be discussed on the national and international spheres, meaning how did this human rights-based police approach begin and how it has been applied into our Philippine setting. Human rights-based approach because in order to do your line of work, you have to incorporate the human rights of your clientele involving your clients. So, international human rights law is binding on all states and their agents, including law enforcement officials. Human rights are a legitimate subject for international scrutiny. Law enforcement officials are obliged to know and apply international standards for human rights. Basically, what this slide is trying to say is that human rights law are spread all across the globe, meaning not just in one country, but as much as possible to all countries who are signatories to the conventions. And once you are a signatory to that convention, you have to follow the basic standards of human rights. Now, as a law enforcement officer, you have to pattern your job in accordance to the convention. Hence, there has to be a human rights based approach when it comes to police work. Now, in the exercise of rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedom of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. Now, what this slide is trying to say is that although human rights are exercised freely and righteously, these are subjected to certain limitations, meaning your right may begin when the rights of others begin when your right begins. For example, if you are a trying to exercise your right to peaceably assembly and you begin to create riots or disturbances or physical atrocities within the area, then your right begins and the right of others, your right ends and the right of others begin because you have already committed atrocities, hence you have ended your right to peaceably assembly. And my right as a police officer to capture you in order to protect public safety will begin. So that's how you balance out the rights of everyone. And that is the usually how we balance the public order with respect to general welfare. Now, according to the PNP Guidebook on Human Rights, human rights-based policing, but I find it very hard to pronounce it policing, but it's better if it's human rights-based approach on police work, is the comprehensive, systematic, and institutional compliance with international human rights standards and practices in the conduct of police or law enforcement functions. So there is already a guidebook for PNP officers on how to conduct themselves or how to conduct their functions or how to conduct their work with respect to and in line with human rights. Now, you have to mainstream human rights-based approach with police work so that once you incorporate these human rights to your practice as a police officer, then chances are your job will be free from trampling on the rights of others. So this so-called human rights-based policing has different types of strategies and plans. This will actually help you to become a police officer who performs his job as a member of the police force, and at the same time your practice is human rights based. Now, as a reform initiative, human rights based policing is a strategic approach for reorienting the police organization from the traditional policing models or theories based purely on social control or repression to a new paradigm anchored on genuine respect for human rights and dignity, transparency, accountability, rule of law, and people's active participation in a democratic governance. Now, previously, when you say police force, the traditional outlook is that you are the crowd control of the government, meaning you are the peacekeepers in these certain situations. But we are already swaying from that type of outlook. We are now performing our jobs based on human rights or based on human rights that are in line with our work. And that is when we perform our jobs, we should see to it that our performance or duties are in line with the rights of humans, such as dignity, keeping our transparency to the public, accountability, keeping the rule of law, and active participation or allowing active participation in a democratic society. Now you have here your characteristics of human rights based policing. The first one is strict observance of police policies and operational procedures. According to this characteristic of human rights-based policing, it entails strict observance of police policies and operational procedures. Most, if not all, violations of human rights occur when police officers do not follow established policies and procedures. Shortcuts, omissions, or blatant disregard for procedures are unacceptable behavior that violate our national laws, PNP rules and regulations, and generally accepted social cultural norms. Now, this is precisely why some police officers fail to perform their job, or they are criminally, civilly, and administratively liable because they do not know how to observe certain operational procedures which are in line with human-based rights. Now, that's the reason why human rights-based education has been incorporated in your syllabus or in the curriculum for criminology, because as the the PNP wants you as early as today to learn what are the basic human rights of individuals, so that when you enter the police force, you'll be able to discern your actions properly. Now, when police officers follow and apply proper procedures, they uphold human rights while doing all that is possible to ensure that the subsequent case to be filed in court against a suspect would prosper in the higher interest of justice. Now, an example for your strict observance of policies and procedures is when a police officer informs an arrested person about his or her Miranda rights. Remember, if you fail to perform, or if you fail to act, or if you fail to cite the Miranda rights, Republic Act 7438 will make you liable for failure to cite the rights of the arrested individual. What else? As a police officer, you have to strictly observe the rights of an individual to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Hence, as a police officer, you should shy away your detainees from unwanted media exposure. Ayaw sila i-expose to social media, ayaw sila exposed to the news, ayaw sila exposed to anything which tends to disrupt their right to be innocent until proven guilty. What else? So you have your adherence to national or domestic and international laws, treaties, standards, and protocols on human rights. Now, human rights-based policing is about adhering to national or domestic and international laws, treaties, protocols, standards of human rights, and law enforcement. Meaning, if you are a police officer, you should be aware of all laws, whether it be domestic, meaning in your local government unit, or to the national level, that includes all of your Republic Acts and executive orders. Now, all PNP personnel must know and understand and adhere to the Philippine laws related to human rights, such as your Republic Act 7438, which defines certain rights of a person arrested, detained, or under custodial investigation, RA 9745 or your Anti-Torture Act of 2009, and Republic Act 9851, your Philippine Act on Crimes Against International Humanitarian Law, Genocide, and other crimes against humanity. As a matter of fact, each police head of each municipality here under my jurisdiction submits an affidavit before me, which it is in compliance with the human rights-based policing. As a matter of fact, sa ilahang affidavit states there that they don't have any these torture chambers, they do not torture their detainees, they don't allow any form of torture within their area of responsibility. So this practice has been made because nga, it has to be their line of work should be in accordance with human rights based approach. Professional competence and courteous service. So when you say competence, you are qualified to be a police officer. And when you say courteous service, you give humble and you are respectful to your fellow police officers, to your superiors, and to your detainees as well as your clients. Now, law enforcement professional must have a high degree of practical knowledge about laws and ordinances, police policies, regulations, and police operational procedures. The police or law enforcement professional must be skilled in the core policing areas such as the maintenance of peace and order, investigation and detection, legal procedures in the arrest and detention of suspects. Remember, you are the first line of defense or first line of offense for the law enforcement. Hence, chances are you will be the source of knowledge when it pertains to the law. Hence, as law enforcement professionals, you should be well equipped with laws and ordinances around your jurisdiction or within your area of responsibility so as to properly educate those who will ask from you and those of the public. Now, professional competence means being an expert in one's line of work. It enables a person to avoid unnecessary mistakes. In the case of police personnel, lack of proficiency or competency may inadvertently lead to violations of human rights. In order to prevent human rights violations, the police must only use calibrated force to subdue suspects. This can only be taught through realistic simulation of incidents involving both armed and unarmed suspects, as well as compliant and resisting persons. So when you say competent, you have to be expert in your work. How do you become expert? By undergoing training, by undergoing several lectures, by studying, by continuing studying, and by um, learning how to put into practice what you have learned. Now, if you become competent, chances are you will be able to evade problems related to human rights because you are knowledgeable of these laws. However, if you lack, or let's say you don't study human rights, chances are you will handle administrative cases because you failed to learn how to properly educate yourself when it comes to human rights, or you failed to perform your line of duty, and you failed to apply the human rights based approach. Respect for rule of law and civilian supremacy. Now, respect for rule of law and civilian supremacy is best exemplified when the police practices accountability for all its actions, or as the case may be, inaction on matters related to the protection of people's legal rights. Now, all police officers must always remember that Article 2, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution states that sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. Now, what this slide what this slide is trying to say is that you have to remember that the people is our clientele, or the people, we serve the public. Now, when we serve the public, we have to be accountable with our actions. And for us to be accountable, we have to be competent, we have to be proficient in our line of duty. And we have to remember that without the people, we could not be in where we are today. Or we could not, without the people, we are not in our positions today, because it is the people who decides what is best for the government. More nag-emphasize ang sovereignty resides in the people and that all government authority emanates from them. Yung mga public officers, these are just representatives of the people. The power of the government originally, or basically, comes from the Republic of the Philippines, or from the people themselves. So that's why dili na to abugon yung mga people or ato mga constituents, because they are the ones who are capable of sovereignty and that they have all the power, government authority within them. Yan ako si Yo-Yo, and I never asked if napamoy na sometime. Klaro ba ako ang explanation, or is there a need for me to clarify on some concepts? Any questions so far? Second years?
None, sir.
None. Okay. Klaro ha, man ka ha. Basig nag-oo lang mo, naulaw mo. Please don't be shy. I'm very approachable, and I appreciate students who ask and students who wish to clarify on some things. Kaya nako'y pasensya na. Anyway, pro-democracy and pro-citizen. So as a member of the police force, you are mandated to have democratic values. And these are best demonstrated when it seeks greater participation by the community in maintaining peace and order. The police organization must always remain responsive and relevant to the needs of the community. Remember, if you fail to respond to the needs of the community, you may be criminally, civilly, and administratively liable. And the community is the PNP's main clientele, meaning ang komunidad, ang inyong kliyente, dili ang mga dili ang mga kaning mga mayor, dili ning mga vice mayor, dili ning mga membro sa SB, dili na sila ang ilahang clientele. But ang clientele nila is kamo, mga tao. Dili sila. We don't serve them, and we do not and definitely they are not our bosses. Now, through dialogues and consultations with stakeholders, the police are able to learn about the issues and concerns that must be addressed at the community level, meaning it would be best if police officers were involved in dialogues and consultations within the community. Why? Because you will be able to assess what the problems are. And once you were able to point out these problems, you can have a plan of action. Now, in most, if not all situations, full cooperation between the police and the community is required in order to solve peace and order problems. Hence, that's why there is need for you, police officers, to have a dialogue with the leaders of a certain community so that you'll be able to address the problems of that community. And not all communities have the same problems. They may have problems with, let's say, safety. They may have problems with garbage. We have it's different from community to another community. Hence, there is a need for you to consult and learn what each community needs from you. Now, there are 10 basic international human rights standards for law enforcement. As a matter of fact, it's already been published by the United Nations through its book. As you see there, guidelines on human rights education for law enforcement officials, and that includes you future police officers. Now, this 10 basic international human rights was originally published by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, the 10 basic international human rights standards for law enforcement are based on the principle that international human rights law is binding on all states and their agents, including law enforcement officials. Meaning, once a country is a signatory to a convention, that country must apply the rules and standards set forth by that convention, and that includes human rights affecting law enforcement officials. Now, therefore, all police and law enforcement personnel have the obligation to know, understand, and apply the following human rights standards. Basically, what this slide is trying to say is that as a police officer and law enforcement agent, you have to know these basic human rights standards in order for you to be qualified or elevated as a police force who practices human rights-based approach tactics. Now, first, you have to remember that there should be equal protections. That's the first standard. When you say equal protection, everyone is entitled to the law without discrimination on any grounds, and especially against violence and other threats. Be especially vigilant to protect potentially vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, and then the women, refugees, displaced persons, and members of minority groups. Now, when you are a police officer, you should not discriminate. So just because the mayor asks you to do this, biyaan mo ang community and i-prioritize mo si mayor because he is a top public official. No, you have to remember that the community is your main clientele and not the higher officials. Now, These vulnerable groups, this is very common in all settings. Vulnerable groups, yun ang children. Why? They are prone to rape, they are prone to abuse, they are prone to being victims of human trafficking, especially women also. The elderly because due to old age, they tend to be weak at some points, especially when we talk about the physical aspect. So they are prone to being robbed. They are prone to theft cases because they could not fend for themselves. Now you have refugees coming from other countries who wish to seek shelter here in our setting or in here in the Philippines. You also have displaced persons, meaning individuals who were removed from an area due to war or conflict or due to a civil uprising, and members of minority groups such as your cultural groups, your malumads, mga ingana. So these are individuals who are very vulnerable to um, violations of human rights. Any questions so far? May pangutana?
Wala, sir. Wala, sir.
Alright, so equal rights, how do you apply that when you become police officer? So, unsa dapat imong buhaton in order for you to practice equal rights? So, come on, future members of the police force must carry and use Miranda warning cards that contain English and Filipino versions. If possible, produce an additional Miranda warning card using the vernacular or most common language dialect in your area of jurisdiction. For example, your Miranda rights, Manggod, should be understood by the person you are about to arrest. Now, if you're mag-English ka o na imuhang gidakop kay, let's say, taga-Katil, o niya, hantod grade 1 lang di iyang naabot, nag-English ka diha, how will he be able to be apprised of his rights? So, pabayong ka, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say against you will be used in the court of law. You have the right to counsel, and the counsel will be able to visit you at all times. So, nanay mong kliyente. Ha? So, yung pasabot. So, you have to incorporate that in your vernacular language. For example, you have to speak in Kamayo kung di yan matigang makasabot, kung di yan makasabot ng Filipino or English. So, langan mo yan na what sign, you have to remain silent in Kamayo gani. Ikaw di ko how do you say that in Katiil kanang or in Kamayo kanang you have the right to remain silent. Aon katungod mo na
Kay katungod nga
Maghilom.
Matingon.
Katingon,
Maghihilom.
aon katungod mo na magkatingon, and kung mo
kay
storya ka, yan pigastorya mo basin magamit laban kan mo. Abo saan ba? So be sensitive to your detainees. Now, police service must be non-selective, meaning you should not be selective just because he is poor, he is rich, unahon mo ang rich. Dili mo unahon ng poor kay poor na bitaw na sila. Wala na tayong buhat ana. So don't do that. Don't discriminate. Now, provide the same quality of service to all people regardless of their age, sex, economic, and political status. Labi na mga kamo boys, pag ang mulapit sa inyo ay kanang gwapa gani kayo, mo gini unahon niya. Ang taon si Lola, diha la kalahal, ko na diha la. Katingon lang ang sa kay unahon ko ini si chicks gani. So, mga ingana ba? O, for example, girls po, unahon niyo itong isay gwapo na kliyente. Biyaan niyo atong mga pangit or ipasa niyo sa mga lalaki. Ano ba? So, don't be selective, be non-selective, and do not discriminate. Also, when you become police officer, train your police personnel through communication and empathy skills. When you say empathy, learn how to understand the feelings of others. Sobra pa sa uyab, no? Dapat, when you become police officers, dili lang inyong uyab, ang inyong uyabon, patibod ang community, patibod ang inyong clientele, especially geared towards addressing concerns of women, children, the elderly, and other vulnerable sectors. Okay, mamagin sila ang prone to violations of human rights. You will not expect violation of human rights from the rich individuals. You will not expect human rights violations by committed against a high-powered public official. No, it will always be coming from the vulnerable sectors. Remember that. Standard 2, respectful treatment. So treat all citizens and victims of crime with compassion and respect, with utmost consideration for their need for safety and privacy. It must be remembered that under the law, all arrested individuals and detainees are still considered innocent and have the right to due process. Meaning, once you are detained, you are just detained in order to answer for a crime you have allegedly committed. And that does not mean you are already convicted for such crime, because the right to due process allows you to be heard by a fair and impartial trial. Remember, only the court can determine their guilt or innocence. Even when they are already convicted by the court, they still have the right to be treated humanely with full respect and dignity. Why? Because our criminal justice system is rehabilitative, meaning we rehab our detainee, our convicted individuals. We try them to recover from their past sins and help them be reintegrated to society. Lain po ng once you're convicted, you are no longer, more na, tuldo ka na ka, convicto na yun ka. But here in our justice society, here in our society, since rehabilitative ta, tagaan na to sila ng chance na magreforma, na magbago, na kaya nila mubalik sa society without by leaving their past behind. In order for you to perform this standard, which is respectful treatment, you should follow the following guidelines in accordance with the PNP handbook. So you allocate a well-secured room inside the police station where the detainee can privately speak with his or her lawyers and family. Remember, the right to see his family and the right to see his lawyer is a right by virtue of Republic Act 7438. Hence, if you fail to perform this right, or if you fail to inform this right to your detainees, you will be held liable. Second, ensure that posters or information materials on the rights of persons arrested, detained, or under investigation are prominently displayed inside the investigation room or desk when booking or investigation of the suspect done. This is to inform detainees what their rights are, so that when the police personnel tend to abuse their right, at least kabalo na mo na they are stepping on your rights. Third, if possible, avoid overcrowding of lock-up cells, which poses health and safety risks to police personnel, detainees, and their visitors. Muna, during the pandemic period, kami mga prosecutors are very lenient because we do not want the detention cells to be overcrowded. Okay, once you overcrowd a detention cell, the chances of transmission of the COVID virus is high. So muna, I really remember katong height of the pandemic period, kung pwede pagawason ang detainee, because we are afraid that the detention cell might be contaminated by the said virus. Fourth, never parade suspects before the media. Meaning, ayaw sila exposed to unwanted attention. They should remain innocent until proven guilty by the courts of law. Remember, you are responsible for safeguarding the dignity, health, and safety of suspects and persons under investigation or custody. As a matter of fact, di ba nakabutang dere, you are responsible for your health and safety. It is the practice of the police officers nowadays that when they arrest a person and once they are subjected to inquest or when they are subjected to inquest proceedings, after the said proceeding, they will be forwarded to the nearest municipal health station in order to have them assessed of their health. Then there is a need to assess the health of the detainee because we do not know what if siya TB, naibutang mo sa detention cell with other detainees. What if mag-spread ang TB sa area? Isa pa, what if he is not fit to be confined in the detention cell because he has heart problems? So, mao na. That's why I laud the police officers nowadays because not only are they concerned about the other interests of the accused, but also they are very particular with the health and safety of their detainees. Any questions so far?
Wala, sir.
Sige. All right. Standard 3, use of force. So, do not use force except when strictly necessary and to the minimum extent required under the circumstances. Rule 113 of the criminal procedure states that you only use force when necessary. Remember, when you arrest an individual, you need not tackle him to the ground. All there is for you to do is restrict him of his movement. And by restricting his movement, let's say, na police officer sa iyang side, na police officer sa iyang another side, that is already restriction and that is already considered as compliance under Rule 113 that he is under restriction of his movement. Hence, his liberty is already restrained. So, porket, tora ba, nasi warrant of arrest ka na. Sige, dako na to siya. Sige ha, ikaw unsa. Ikaw tackle siya sa ground. Ikaw patumba siya sa lupa. Kaagabi po. What if compliant what if ang criminal case lang dahil siya kay staff inyong giun sa gi-tackle to the ground ang tao in town kaluoy po. What if compliant is sa police officers, di ba? So, if you see that the accused is compliant in your authority, then there's no need to use force. Moingon na siya, sige sir, mo sunod ko sa inyo ha, mo uyon ko sa inyong authority, mo habol ko sa inyo ha, or something like that. So that is already enough. That is already compliant under Rule 113. So, as suggested by the PNP, in order for you not use necessary force, in order for you not to use excessive force, there is a need to reorient the police personnel about the use of force doctrine or the force continuum, with emphasis on the use of lethal force only as a last resort. Remember, katugingon ako ng force doctrine, motugingon ako na you only use force whenever necessary. Maximum tolerance is the general rule, meaning you tolerate your constituents as much as possible, but you will only restrain them once public safety is already at stake. What else? You use only lethal force as a last resort, meaning pag kita na gani mo na mo let's say nikuha na siya sa iyang sa iyahang pocket o gun and is about to aim at you, then that is the only time you can use lethal force against him because you are trying to act out of self-defense. Now, what if igo lang siya musumbag sa imuha tapos mugamit ka gun to restrict him? There is a discrepancy in terms of the weapons used. You used a lethal weapon and he used a non-lethal weapon, which is just his kamao. So, there is this discrepancy, and once there is a discrepancy, chances are you will be held liable kay gabi pud kay sumbago lang unta ka unya ang imong gigamit is a firearm against this individual. So remember, use only lethal force as a last resort and with full contemplation that the other person will really try to pin you down or kill you. Again, there is a need to retrain police personnel in the proper arrest procedures with emphasis on non-lethal tactics, weapons retention techniques, and officer safety measures. Meaning, there is a need to train the police personnel not to use lethal force by using techniques like siguro ambot itudloan siguro mo self-defense or karate or sa ba. I remember my fourth year students, they have undergone kanang karate ata to. I'm not sure. Ambot lang sa inyo kung gi-undergo mo ana. Diba mo lesson on self-defense? Wala. Okay, sige. Number 4. So, policing non-violent assemblies. So, avoid using force when policing unlawful but non-violent assemblies. When dispersing violent assemblies, use force only to the minimum extent necessary. So, usay pasabot ani. Leave them be if they are not violent. If you just see them shouting there and throwing curses against the government, biyahin na sila. May sila, ang government, tuta sa USA, lang. Even though sakit sa imong heart na ikaw, public officer ka, leave them be because it is their right to freedom of speech and the right to peaceably assembly. But when they begin to riot and they begin to disrupt public safety by throwing smoke bombs against you or against other people surrounding the area, then that's the time you disperse them. And you disperse them using only the minimum force necessary. So for example, nag-riot na ang mga tao dito, ayaw po mo gamit og baril sa. So you may use tear gas. You may use tear gas because they are already trying to violate the safety of the public. Because you want to use lethal force as a last resort, you may use tear gas. Labayan sa tear gas. So sakit kaya silang mata. Ilak-ilak na sila. Have you been exposed to a tear gas? Nakatry na mo, ana? Na-feel na ninyo how it is to be thrown tear gas at you? Hello?
Wala pa, sir.
Wala pa. Wala kasilaw na ko. Sakit sa mata. Tapos kanang kanang hose na usog kayo tubig. Kusog ba ng gawas ana kanang tubig kanang ginagamit na pang disperse? Kusog kay na ba malabay ka? Kanang matumbag yun ka, kana sakit pud na. So do not ask me nganong naka-experience ako ana kay sa una gago ko na pagkatao. Anyway, moving on. So what are the guidelines and suggested actions for you to use only necessary force against people who assembly or people who voice out grievances against the government. So number one here is very very vital. Kung pwede, arrange a meeting with the leaders or organizers na nagprotesta a day before the protest demonstrations. So you should hold an open dialogue with them para ma-establish niyo kung saan ground rules. Like for example, soryaha ang leader sa mga protesters. Sir, maulan niya ang extent sa inyong protest. Pwede mo magshagit diha, pwede mo magamit og noise barrage diha, as long as it will not cause any trouble sa public safety, or as long as dili mo mag-disrupt og other individuals. Excuse me. Anyway, by doing that, excuse me. Excuse. Right, sorry about that. Hindi ko sanay na mag-talk very long. How do you... Okay. All right, so that's how you should do as future police officers. Mag-hold mo og dialogue with the protesters kay para makabalo sila kung hantod asa lang sila dapat mag-protest or usang kaya dapat nila protest. Number 2, advise crowd control elements in situations requiring the use of batons or truncheons. They should only target the fleshy parts of the body, such as the arms, torso, legs, and thighs. So sa pasabot ani crowd control, leading crowd control sa ML ha or sa Dota or sa League of Legends, crowd kanang mga stand ninyo, mga slow, dili na siya pasabot ana. Pasabot ani, when you use your baton or your truncheon, for example nagkagubot na, ang i-target ninyo ayaw po itong mga critical areas sa body such as your neck, the head, the heart. Ayaw to siya kay that means you have intent to kill or intent to injure the protesters. So you should only target the fleshy parts. Kung sa mga fleshy parts, kanang iyang arms, kanang iyang torso, legs, thighs. So pasabot na pag makita nila na, you only have the intention to incapacitate these troublemakers. So by doing that, dili mo ma-hold liable for criminal, civil, or administrative liability. Now, hitting protesters with the baton or the truncheon on the head, face, neck, shoulder blades, or elbows, fingers, groin, knees, and ankles must be avoided since strikes to these parts may cause serious to permanent injuries or even death. So the goal there is to only incapacitate the troublemakers and not to kill them, my dear God. Further, all persons arrested must be properly restrained or handcuffed using scientific control methods and thereafter brought safely to the police station for processing. Arrested protesters must not be kicked, punched, or dragged by the hair or feet. Diba nakita ninyo sa ubang news na kaning mga protesters kay gipang dagit na gamit ang ilahang sanina, gamit ilahang mga legs, kay murag baboy nagikatay ba? You should not do that because that is already not human-based approach. And tao lang magita no, manggigil magita sa ilaha. Kaya po sila i-kick, kaya po sila i-punch once na sila sa inyuhang um, uh, building. So sa akin mo no, kay sa atong kalagot, sa atong panggigil sa ilaha, kanang di maging maiwasan, pero kana ayun lang sila unsa, ayun lang sila hilabti. Now, when fire trucks are deployed as part of the crowd control formation, ensure that appropriate fire hoses are used to avoid excessive water pressure that may cause serious to permanent injury. So sa panahon yun ako, sa kakusog sa hose na gigamit sa amua, basta nang lupad yun mi, malaman ako, it's so painful, mura ka gi ambot, bukas ambot, basta sakit kaya basta nagkabunog ko ato tungod sa kakusog sa hose. So these are just the guidelines that will help guide you and help you to become compliant with the standards. Use of lethal force. Lethal force should not be used except when strictly unavoidable in order to protect your life or the lives of others. Remember, if you protect your life, meaning you use that out of self-defense, or you protect the lives of others, meaning you protect the lives of strangers, these are justifying circumstances, meaning you cannot be held criminally liable for doing such acts because these are provisions under the revised penal code that will not give you any liability so long as you protect yourself out of self-defense and you protect others because of harm. Sooner or later, you will learn this. I think next sem mo mag-criminal law 1. So the guidelines are, if possible, conduct regular firearms proficiency training and testing for all personnel. Sometimes mong good, we are not so adept at using firearms na sa kulba nato, we already triggered the gun, we already pushed its trigger. So there is a need for us to be proficient in using the gun. What else? Of course, you have to, as police officers, you have to check your mental health at all times. We cannot deploy a police officer who is mentally unstable. What if imong i-deploy the police officer sa mga nag-peaceably assembly kay mentally unstable? What if he goes under the bus and what? Nakalog siya and out of stress and out of lack of checking his mental health, nagpabuto siya dito. So, di ba? Mauna, when you become police officers, you will be subjected to neuro exam, meaning it will test your capacity whether or not you are morally, psychologically capable of handling the stresses of being a police officer. Standard 6, arresting persons on legal grounds. You have to remember that you can only arrest an individual if there is a valid ground. Now, if there is no valid ground, ayaw po sila i-arrest. Again, use Miranda warning cards, take extra care to ensure the safety of the arrested person, and personal properties of the detained arrested person must be properly inventoried, documented, and kept in a secure location inside the police station. Unfortunately, letter C has not been complied by the police officers in the Davao Oriental region. Why? Pag mag-arrest man gud sila without a warrant, dili nila i-inventory tung nakuha nila sa ilang gi-detain. Like for example, a gold watch, a wallet containing 50,000 pesos, dili nila i-appeal. Kaya ang buhaton nila, i-distribute na nila among themselves. So I find it very, the culture to be deeply rooted and wala ko ka-expect na they could do that. Meaning, talamak ang corruption yun among police officers, sad to say. And I am not saying this because just for the sake of makichismis ko. I really witnessed this personally because I was a lawyer. Before ko nag-prosecutor, I was into private practice and my client was charged with Republic Act 9165 for possession and sale of dangerous drugs. Now, this client of mine was my classmate during the elementary years and high school years, so we know each other. So he told me, din kanang so good, nagud ko'y kwarta, napud ko'y watch, wala nang nagiuli sa kuha tung kwarta nako, anak ko. Do you want me to threaten them? Anak ko, ayaw po, kay basig ikaw ang maunsa, ako lagi daw ang madali. Ano ko na, no, dili ko madali because I know a lot of individuals na who can back up me and kabalo ko na mga hadlok gini sila. So I threatened the police officers. The following day, ligawas man ang unsa, ligawas man ang wallet, ligawas ang gold watch. I threatened them not because of my family name here, which is well known here in Baganga, but I threatened them because they can be discharged from their duties if they continue to practice that. Nangutan na sila, kagisa mo ng abogado. So, wala po sila kabalo ba na ako, I was mentored by during my time in private practice, akong backer is judge. So, ang judge na naga-back up sa kuha is powerful. So, mauna, I threatened them na if you fail to correct your mistakes, then kamo giluoy sa moto. Nigawas ang wallet sa akong classmate, nigawas ang iyang gold watch. So I hope you learned a valuable lesson here na you should not follow your seniors. Remember, ang paspas na kwarta, paspas na pud na mawala. Mas mayo nang you earn money out of labor or out of hard work. Kay kana siya magdugay gid sa inyo ha, and karma will not bite you in the end. Anyway, moving on. Standard 7, detainees' rights. Ensure that all detainees immediately after their arrest have access to their family and lawyer. They must also be given immediate medical assistance whenever necessary. So that does not mean that if they are detained, they are already deprived of certain rights. Remember, Republic Act 7438, again, kapilan ako siya giyaw-yaw, they should have access to their family and to their lawyer. And they should also be assisted whenever medical issues arise. Okay. So, the question here is, sir, where can I get a lawyer? So, you can answer, you have the option to visit the public attorney's office, which is just beside our office here in Baganga. You may also contact the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Davao Oriental Chapter, which is I'm a member of because it's a chapter or a member, a club, not club. It's a confederation of lawyers practicing here in Davao Oriental. So in short, kanang mga huwes, kanang mga prosecutors, kanang mga private prosecutors, kanang mga private lawyers, they are all members of IBP Davao Oriental. It's just that you need to find a good private lawyer for you to hire or take your case. Standard 8, humane treatment of detainees. All detainees must be treated humanely. Under any circumstance, and says do not inflict, instigate, nor tolerate any act of torture or ill treatment and refuse to obey any order to do so. So this has already been taught to you several times that Detainees should be afforded with the greatest respect and dignity while being detained. You should not torture them. You should not ill-treat them because chances are, if you were caught, you will be accountable and liable to several suits and cases to be lodged against you. Now, in order to prevent torture within your area of jurisdiction or within your building, you have to install audio-video recording equipment. This is just a suggested action na. What if wala na tayo budget anang audio-video recording or kanang CCTV? Di ba? So, di na to pugson kay kung pugson na to, magdugo na siya. Now, resources and circumstances would allow physical improvements may be undertaken to ensure that detention facilities are well ventilated and well lighted. Okay, so far, Baganga Municipal Police Station, gwapo ilahang detention cell kay hawan kaayo and well ventilated. Katiin Municipal Police Station is also good. Kay kapila ko nag-visit diha, but Boston I haven't seen it, so I cannot make any comment about it. Standard 9, refusal to obey unjust orders. So, do not carry out, order, or cover up extralegal killings or enforce disappearance and refuse to obey any order to do so. When you say extralegal killings, do not kill individuals out of orders of your superiors. Remember, capital punishment of death has already been abrogated by this society, meaning there is no longer a death penalty. Ang naalang kay reclusion perpetua or almost to a certain degree, lifetime imprisonment. So you have no right to kill your detainees, whether it be ordered by your superior or by another public officer or influential individual. Now, I remember one case, you have to remember under Republic Act the 9165, there is a provision there which states that planting of evidence against the accused will make you, public officer or any law enforcement officer, liable for reclusion perpetua if found guilty. Meaning, ayaw mo po og planta og ebidensya laban sa akusado because once you are caught, you will be held liable for planting evidence and the punishment for that would be reclusion perpetua. So sayang inyong giswelahan, sayang inyong sweldo, sayang inyong loved ones because tungod anang pagplanta sa inyong evidence, na lifetime imprisonment na lang intawon mo. Now, there are a lot of police officers which I know of who planted evidence here in our jurisdiction. And I've already informed them and warned them and actually, friends man ako ang mga police dire. I just tell them that you should end this practice of yours because once you're caught, the public attorney's office will do everything they can in just to put you in jail. So I tell you now, you are still young, you are still very enthusiastic about being a police officer and upholding what being a police officer. Please, please, please learn not how to be influenced by money. Learn not how to be influenced by your superiors unless it's lawful. Kay it will cost you a lot. So guidelines and suggested actions or suggested items. All right. There should be debriefing whenever there are pre-deployment situations. So you should be debriefed, meaning fully educated, fully informed, so that your mission will be accomplished without prejudice to trampling on human rights. So when in doubt about a specific order, as a police officer, you should seek clarification. Kung dili klaro ang order sa inyo na kay questions, pangutana mo and seek guidance. Standard 10, reporting violations. Report all violations of these standards to your senior officer and to the nearest prosecutor's office. Amo you can always ask help from me. Do everything within your ability and authority to ensure steps are taken to investigate violations of these standards. As a matter of fact, kanang inyong mga police diya sa Boston, sige pangayog tabang sa kwa, na hindi sila liable administratively. So, ginatawagan man ako sila because you have under mo sa kwa, so maluwi po ko sila kanang they'll face administrative liability kunya dili nimo tabangan luwi po. So since they are under me, they are considered also as my colleagues, so I help them, but I help them legally. Di po na kanang to the point na I turn mag-magic ko sa ilahang kaso, like for example turning black into white and white into black. Hindi po rin. I help them what is available in the law so that they can readily defend themselves in court. So suggested actions: maintain copies of missions, orders, memoranda notes, and other official documents related to police operations involving your participation. Why? This will serve as your like parang proof na you have been deployed to this mission or you have been tasked to do this. And once you have this, you may use this for whatever legal purposes will serve you. Now, follow prescribed procedures for reporting violations of police policies and procedures. So, when you report violations, it should be from immediate superior to higher office. And that ends our discussion for today. Any questions so far? Hello?
No, sir.
No? So, nasabtan, very clear ang lecture.
Yes, sir.
Alright, sige. So, thank you for your participation for tonight. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you were able to learn by heart my side notes, akong yaw-yaw, so that you will become good police officers. If not good, the best police officers of the Oriental. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Bye, sir.
Thank you,
All right.
sir.
Sige, thank you.